In this video, I'll be going over how I built my own sports betting AI agent completely within n8n. So when you input a match, the agent will first get a sentiment analysis on public articles, and then historical match data, and then finally odds data to form one final analysis. The agent will tell you whether it's worth betting on the match or not and who you should bet for. Here's an example of the agent live in action. So we can type in any upcoming match. I'll do the Vettori match in UFC. And once we execute, we can see that it's first getting odds data and then historical fight data from our Supabase table. And then finally a sentiment analysis on public news articles. And then from there, it'll form one final recommendation. So as we can see here in the output, the agent is recommending Vettori as the winner. But that's not all, because again, we want to compare this to the current odds data to see if we should make a bet. And we can see here that the odds are not particularly favorable for a strong bet. Now, the way they got to this recommendation is again through our three main data sources. So first we have the odds analysis, which we can see here. And then we have the fighter data analysis, which we can see inside our Supabase table. And then finally, we have the sentiment analysis of public news articles to create this final recommendation. So they're saying that while Vettori is the recommended fighter based on odds, historical data and sentiment, the current odds are kind of low for value. The agent is saying that a bet on Vettori is not highly favorable at this moment, and if we are inclined to bet, a higher risk reward would be placing a small bet on the opponent instead at 230. And that ultimately the odds for Vettori are not generous enough to recommend a strong bet. Now let's go over how I made this n8n workflow at a high level, and then I'll make it from scratch so that you can have your own personal sports betting AI agent for your own use. And just as a reminder, this is all built within n8n, which is a low-code, no-code workflow builder. Now, before we continue, I just started up a free school community where I'll host all of the templates that are shown in my videos, as well as step-by-step guides on how to create real working AI agents for businesses in any industry. So make sure to click the link in the description if you want to learn alongside a network of other AI builders. So first, we have our Telegram trigger, which is where we input the fight we want to analyze. And then I've added in a second node, which just takes the two fighters' names from that message. So as you can see, the text is Vettori versus Dolitz. And then I'm taking fighter A and fighter B and marking them as such here. Now that we have the fighters marked, we can begin extracting data from our three main sources. So to start, we first want all of the odds data within the MMA markets. So what I'm doing is calling on the odds API, and we want all of the odds for MMA within the US region. Once we get all the odds data, we want to filter this out so that it only includes our two fighters, so fighter A and fighter B. This way, our output only includes odds between the Vettori and Dolitze match. So within this output, we can see that we have odds from all these different bookmakers. So we have Bet Rivers here. Scrolling down, we also have Bovada odds. We also have Bet Online, DraftKings. We should also have FanDuel right here. And then also Bet MGM. So you can see we have a price for both the fighters, Vettori as well as Dolitze. This completes the odds data. And then from here, we can move on to historical fight data, which we have stored within Supabase. So later on in the video, I'll show you where I got the spreadsheet from, but this just includes all previous MMA fights within the US markets between 2020 till now. So what we're doing inside the Supabase node is just referencing that entire spreadsheet and then getting the rows specifically for fighter A and fighter B. And then as we can see in the output, we have 14 different data points of matches between either Dolitze or Vettori from different matches. So we can see here, we have Dolitze versus Kevin Holland. This occurred in 2024. And then double clicking into this, we have a ton of different data points. So we have the number of rounds, draws, current win streak between the two fighters, as well as wins by KO, submission. We also have fight data on the Dolitze versus Anthony Smith on 2024, June 29th. And here we also have the Marvin Vettori versus Robert Whittaker fight that occurred on 2022. And again, with all the different data points to be able to analyze how the match went and how their historical fight data lines up. This output just makes sure that we have a very complete view to give to the AI as to how well the fighters are performing in their previous matches. And then lastly, what we want to do is add a sentiment analysis for our third data point. So what we're doing here is getting a ton of different news articles from the newsapi.org. And then we can filter the news articles from either fighter A or fighter B and include UFC so that these are news articles that are only within the UFC realm. I'm also making sure that these are recent news articles from the past 14 days. So we have 20 total articles that we can base a sentiment analysis on. We're then feeding all of these articles into an OpenAI message model and having them return an output for us that tells us how the public sentiment looks between the two fighters. So we can see here in the output that overall, while both fighters have their strengths, Marvin Vettori seems to be viewed with more confidence from those public articles. Once we have all these three data points finalized, we can merge them into one single JSON output and then feed it to our AI agent. The AI agent then takes all these data points and then creates an output based on our custom prompt. So we tell the agent that they're an expert at sports betting, and then we provide them with all the data. So we have odds data, fighter data, and sentiment analysis. And then we want them to recommend which fighter will win, and if the odds are favorable enough to actually place a bet on the winner. All right, that was a pretty high level overview of the workflow, but let me now create it from scratch so that you understand in detail how to make this for yourself. So starting off in our workflow, what we first want to do is add a trigger. So this can be anything if you want yours to be based on Slack or WhatsApp or even any other messaging service. But for us, we'll just do Telegram. So we'll select Telegram and then we'll do on message. This way we can type in the fight that we want to analyze directly within Telegram. What you first want to do is connect your Telegram account, which is super simple, trigger on message. And that's about all we need to do inside our trigger. So I just went on Telegram and typed in Vittori versus Dolice, and we can see that it outputs the text right here inside our output window. Next, what we want to do is format this so that we can take out fighter A and fighter B from the message. So next, what we want to do is add in a set field node. So just type in set, and from here, we can either modify, add, or remove item fields. And this is where we define fighter A and fighter B to use in the rest of our workflow. So for the first field to set, we'll call this fighter A. So within fighter A, what we want to do is take our text here and then remove the verses as well as trim the rest of the text so that it only shows Vittori. This is a super simple expression that you can ask ChatGPT, but feel free to copy and paste it just as I have it here. And then below this, we'll just want to define fighter B as well. So we'll call this fighter B. And then once again, we want to take the other half of the text. So because this is Vittori versus Dolice, we now want to show Dolice as fighter B. So again, split the verses from the text and get the second half. So now we have Vittori as fighter A and Dolice as fighter B. This makes sure that our fighters are marked for the rest of the workflow. So now that we have the fighters marked, let's go ahead and work on the 3 different data categories. So again, we need the odds data, historical fight data, and then the sentiment analysis data. So we can first work on the odds data. So what you want to do is first add in an HTTP request node. And what we can do here is call on the odds API to get odds data for MMA fights. So all you would need to do is go to the odds API and just get an API key, which is completely free up to, I think, around 50 uses per minute. Once you have the API key, you can now reference the endpoint. So in our case, we want all MMA fight data. So feel free to copy my URL as I have it here. It's api.theoddsapi.com, v4 sports, and then we want MMA, we want the odds data, and then region, the US, markets, and then we want the API key, which we would then paste in our own custom API key. So just paste in your own API key, and then once you test the step, it should now output all of the different recent MMA match odds. So we can see we have matches on March 15th. So these are all of the DraftKings odds based on March 12th. Scrolling down, we also have the Bet Online odds as of March 12th, FanDuel as of March 12th, so on and so forth. So again, this just shows all the upcoming fighters within MMA for the US markets. Now, because this is all the upcoming fight data odds, what we want to do is filter this so that it only includes odds for fighter A and fighter B's match. So from here, just add in another node called filter, and this is where we will filter the data. Now this is super simple. What we want to do is filter the home team and the away team. Now an important thing here is that the home team should not be equal to, but it should be contains. And the reason for this is because we're only using the last name inside our very first Telegram output. So if we went to our trigger here, we can see that we typed in Vittori versus Dolice, not the full name. So inside the filter, what we want to do is make sure that this only contains the last name. It doesn't have to be an exact match on the last name. So then now we can reference that the home team can either be fighter A or fighter B. So inside our schema, we can collapse HTTP requests and now reference fighter A. And then we'll do the same exact thing, but for fighter B. So once again, home team, but this time this could be equal to fighter B. And we have to set the condition to be or instead of and so that either of these things would satisfy the filter. And then now if we test the step, the output should only include the odds for this Dolice and Vittori fight. So now testing the step, we can see that it discarded 65 items and it only kept one item, which is this Marvin Vittori versus Roman Dolice fight. And now we only have odds data for this one particular match on March 16th. This finalizes all the data we need for the odds to pass over to the agent, and now we can begin working with historical fight data. Now, like I mentioned, this is all in Supabase, so let me show you how to get the spreadsheet. So inside Kaggle, there's an ultimate UFC dataset. This includes all matches from 2010-ish to recently. So all you want to do is download the CSV and then we can load it into Supabase. And again, if you're working with a different type of sport, you can find a similar dataset for that sport, or you can use an API or even web scrape information. The method doesn't matter as much as long as you get good, clean data. So downloading the data onto our desktop, we can see that this is what it looks like. I just went ahead and loaded it into Google Sheets just for explanatory purposes. And you could clean up the data a bit if you want. All I did was deleted everything from 2010 to 2020, since those data points are a bit too old and it doesn't really help us inside our current analysis. We only want historical data that's recent so that we can gauge how well the fighters were doing based on the past few years, not how well they did in 2010. So right now I have 2000 rows from 2021 up till currently 2024, December 14th. Next, what you want to do is go to Supabase and create a new project. So I called mine UFC test. Now I haven't changed anything inside the project. All we did was create a blank project. And then from here, we can go to our table editor and begin importing all of our data. By having all of our data in Supabase, we'll be able to directly reference rows from our n8n workflow rather than having this on Google Sheets or another third-party application. And this just makes our data a lot more readable for the workflow and the agent as a whole. So all you want to do is create a new table. And then inside this menu, what you want to do is import your data from a CSV. And then from here, you can select your cleaned up CSV from Kaggle. Once you attach this, they give you a summary. So we can see that there's 2017 rows, not including the headers, with 118 columns of data. And then below, we have a preview of the first 20 columns and first 20 rows. Next, what you want to do is save. And then next, we don't need a primary key because again, we have two different fighters. There's not one single fighter that this row is based on. So just scrolling up, you can just call this UFC data and then click save. Now you might get an error where it only imports the columns, but not the actual rows. And that's because the data isn't too clean when we import it into Supabase. And this can just be from blank values. So right now, what we need to do is allow null or blank values inside every single one of these columns. So you can do this manually, but I'll just show you a shortcut by using the SQL editor. So what you can do is just run some code so that every single column, in our case we have 118, all of them can allow null values. This is so all the blank values on our CSV don't get counted as errors. So from here, you can simply ask ChatGPT to provide you some SQL code, or you can just copy this exactly. Now all the columns can now allow null values so that you can have 0 or blank values inside your spreadsheet. Next, just click run. We can see success. And then inside our UFC data, what we can do is import the data once again. Now selecting our CSV, we can see that these are the rows to add. Click import data, and now it's adding all the rows to our spreadsheet. And awesome, we have successfully imported 2017 rows of data into our Supabase database. And again, these are what was causing the initial error. So if there's a blank value in the spreadsheet, it'll pop up as null. But if we didn't allow the columns to have null values, then this would have all caused an error. Now heading back to n8n, what we can do is add in our Supabase node. So let me just show you. If we select Supabase, we want to get many rows. So we want to get all the rows that include either fighter A or fighter B. So this way we have historical data on both of the fighters. So what this get many rows function does is parse through all 2000 rows of our Supabase database and then only return the rows that include either fighter A or fighter B. So first, make sure that you're connected to your Supabase account. Super simple. If you don't have a credential, click create new and follow the documentation. And again, we want to get many rows, not just one single row, because we want to get back all the rows that have either fighter A or fighter B. And this way we have comprehensive data on how both of these fighters performed in their previous matches. Next, for the table name, we want to select the new table we just created, which was called UFC data. You can set a limit if you want, if you do think that you'll have a ton of different data points, but 50 is fine for now. And then below here, we can add the filters on how we actually get the rows needed from the Supabase. So for the first field name or ID, this just matches all the columns we have. So the two main columns inside our CSV are red fighter and blue fighter. So these are the two columns that we need to match our data on. So just to show you how our CSV looks like, we have a red fighter and a blue fighter. So what we need to do is check both of these columns to make sure that fighter A or fighter B appears in either red fighter or blue fighter. So you basically check this 4 times. So fighter A or fighter B can be a red fighter, and then fighter A or fighter B can also be a blue fighter. So these are the 4 filters we need to add. So first, what we do is select red fighter. And then important here is that the condition can be full text. So what we want to do is make sure that it just contains the last name of the fighter, because again, that's what we input in Telegram, not the full name. It doesn't have to be an exact match. It just has to contain somewhere inside the full text the last name of the fighter. And again, this is because in our edit fields, our fighter A is Vettori. We don't want to contain Marvin Vettori. We only want to contain Vettori so that if it says Marvin Vettori, it'll still match for us. So the way we would do this is that inside our search function, we can select plain to query. And then for the field value, we want to match this to fighter A. So all this means is that inside our red fighter column, so if we head over here, inside this entire red fighter column, what we're doing is checking to make sure that the full text contains fighter A. So in our case, we need to check that the full text of that column contains Vettori somewhere. And then again, the red fighter can also be fighter B. So we'll add a new condition. Once again, we'll do red fighter, full text, and plain to. And then for the field value, this time it's fighter B. So heading back into our Google Sheets, we're checking this entire column to make sure that it's going to match either on Vettori or Dolice. And then now we'll do this 2 more times, but for the blue fighter instead of the red fighter. So now for our field name, this will be blue fighter, condition, full text. Because again, we only want to match the last name, plain to query, and fighter A could be a blue fighter, Vettori, condition, once again, blue fighter. we want to check the full text and see if it contains this last name. Now for the search, plain 2. And then for the field value, only the last name, which is Dolice. So we'll place that in there. And then lastly, what you want to check to make sure is that this must match is on any filter, not all filters. So think of it like this. If any of these filters do light up, then it'll return that row. But if you select all filters, then this means all 4 of these filters have to match exactly, which again is impossible, and it'll turn up with 0 results. So make sure that must match is on any of these filters so that any of these filters will satisfy the condition. And then next, what we want to do is make sure that the Supabase node is connected to our edit fields. So this will be its own separate workflow you can think of. And then this will be our second workflow. So this is getting all the odds data. Below this, we're getting all the historical data. And then double clicking into here, let's go ahead and test this step. And then now after testing the step, we can see that for the output, we get 14 separate rows that contain either Dolice or Vittori. So the first row it returns is the one with Dolice as the red fighter. And this was a fight back in 2024, October 5th. Then our next row that returns is Dolice once again, but this time he's a blue fighter inside the spreadsheet. And this is 2024, June 29th. Next, we have Roman Dolice once again as the red fighter this time on 2024, February 3rd. And then next we can see it returned a row that Vittori was the red fighter. So all we're doing is basically filtering out from both of these columns, whether it included either Vittori or Dolice as either the red fighter or blue fighter. And there are 14 rows inside the spreadsheet that includes either of these fighters. And then next what we want to do is because it returned 14 rows, we want to combine this into one single output to make it easier for the agent to read. So all we need to do is add in a code node. And you can get this code either from ChatGPT directly. It's pretty simple JavaScript code, or you can just copy it and paste what I have here. But all this does is merge each item into one single array. So if we test this step, we have 14 items here, and then now we have one single item. And if we compare the outputs, they're the same, but now we just label it fighter data. And instead of 14 separate items or 14 rows, this is just one single JSON array. Now this concludes our historical data that we can send over to our AI agent. And then lastly, what we need to do is a sentiment analysis on public news articles. So first, let's go ahead and create another HTTP request node. And let's first connect this node back to edit fields. So now we have this directed into 3 sort of like sub workflows. Once we have the edit fields of fighter A and fighter B, it's first doing an HTTP request on odds data and then historical data for fighters. And then finally, we have our sentiment data here. Now for our request, what I'm going to do is use the news API, but you can use any API you want if you want to do a more tailored sports API. But I find that the news API pretty much covers all major news articles that do get released. So this is the URL, newsapi.org/v2/everything. And this just makes sure that this includes all of the news articles that are within this API. And because this is all the articles, we do want to filter this. First, make sure they're recent articles, but second, and more importantly, these have to include the fighter names. So what we can do is select send query parameters. And for our first parameter, we'll do a Q for value. And then for the value, we want this to either be fighter A, fighter B, and has to include UFC. So what we can do is first drag over fighter A. All this means is that the news articles has to include Vittori, but we want Vittori or fighter B, so we can type in or and then drag in fighter B. So now the result is either Vittori or Dolice, but some people could share these names that aren't UFC fighters. So then we can add an and we want this to just include UFC inside the article somewhere. This makes sure that all the articles are UFC focused and includes either fighter A or fighter B somewhere inside the content. Next, we want to make sure that the articles are somewhat recent, so we can add a parameter called from. And then for this value here, we can go ahead and set this to be today's date minus 14 days. And you can copy this JavaScript code exactly. All this is doing is taking our date now and then minusing 14 days from it. So this means that we'll get all news articles between February 26, 2025 till today, which is March 12th. Next, let's go ahead and add another parameter. Here, we just want to sort by popularity. So we can do sort by, and then the value is popularity. This just makes sure that the most popular articles appear first so that they weigh a bit heavier inside the analysis. And then finally, we just want to add our API key. So this is where you need to personally sign up for the news API, which once again is free, but you need to get your own personalized API key and paste it here. So I'll paste mine later, but this is where you input your value. And then now let's go ahead and test the step. And we can see that in the past 2 weeks, there are 21 articles that have to deal with either Vittori or Dolice and the UFC. And if we scroll down, we can see who the articles are from. So the first one is Forbes, UFC Vegas 104 fight card. Again, all UFC related articles. And what this does is get all the public news from the fight, and we can form a sentiment analysis based on all the opinions that are shown inside the contents here. So for our next node, what we want to do is connect an AI node. So in our case here, we can use OpenAI since it's pretty simple. Select Advanced AI and then OpenAI. And then what we want to do is message a model. And because this isn't too intensive, we can do GPT-4o Mini. All we're doing is just taking all the news articles and evaluating them to provide a sentiment analysis just on if it's positive or negative for each fighter. So I'll select 4o Mini here. And then for this text, feel free to copy and paste what I write here inside this custom prompt. So what I wrote here is to please analyze, and I just dragged over the articles here. And then I just made sure to stringify the articles so that they appear in a string rather than JSON. The model will then provide a sentiment analysis on who's more likely to win. And then what we want to do is include our original text, which is Vettori versus Delice. So this is what the output to the model looks like. It says, please analyze, and then we're including all of the different news articles. And then below all the news articles at the very end, we say, and provide sentiment analysis on who is more likely to win, Vettori versus Delice. Because again, here we're referencing our first Telegram trigger and what we wrote in the message. Next, let's go ahead and test this step. And we can see that 4o Mini does provide an analysis. So going down, we have a matchup context, historical context. We have fighter profiles for both Delice and Vettori. We have recent reporting based on the articles, analytical insights, and overall sentiments. So it says the overall sentiment leans towards Marvin Vettori as the more likely winner in the matchup. We can see that he had a previous victory over Delice, and we can see that the analysis suggests that everyone in the public is generally favoring Vettori. So taking a step back here, we have our 3 data sources finalized. So the first is our odds. So we took all the recent odds for upcoming MMA matches and then filtered them for only Delice or Vettori. Next, we took all the historical match data for both Delice and Vettori. And then finally, we're doing a sentiment analysis on all public news articles written about either Delice or Vettori and their upcoming fight. So with these 3 data sources, what we want to do is merge these into one single JSON output. So let's go ahead and add a node called merge. Make sure that this is set to append so that they appear one after the other. And for the number of inputs, this will be 3 because we have 3 different data sources. And then now it's as simple as connecting each to each input. First data source to the first input, second data source to the second input, and third data source to the third input. So now testing this workflow, we can see that we're merging all 3 different data sources to one single output with 3 items. And then next, what we'll want to do is condense these 3 items into one single item to feed into our AI agent node. So to do this, what you want to do is add in one final code node. And just like before here, what we want to do is merge everything into one single item. So feel free to copy my code here or simply ask ChatGPT. Again, it's fairly simple JavaScript code. And all this does is merge all 3 of our outputs into one single JSON output. So now if we test this step, we can see that we have 3 items inside our input. And then our output only includes one item that still has all of our data. So starting off, we have odds data, we have historical fighter data, and then scrolling all the way to the bottom, we have our sentiment data. And this is our sentiment analysis based on all the public news articles between the fight for Vettori and Delice. Now we can finally feed this one single item into our AI agent node. So add another node, advanced AI, and what we want to do is select AI agent. Now this AI agent won't really use any tools. So what we can do is just select conversational agent since we just want to talk to the agent and have it provide an analysis. And then for the source for prompt, we'll define it below and write in our own custom prompt for the agent. So feel free to copy my custom prompt. All I did was write, you're an expert sports betting analyst, analyze the following 3 sets of data for the upcoming fight between, and then I'm first referencing our very first Telegram message, so Vettori versus Delice. And then in section 1, I have odds data, and then I reference all of the odds data, and then we stringify it so that the LLM can understand it instead of JSON output. And then here we say that this section includes betting odds for both fighters from multiple bookmakers, and we want the agent to review the prices, compare them, and assess any discrepancies or consensus among the bookmakers. Now in the next section, we have all the fighter data. So once again, we reference our entire output from fighter data. So all I did was drag over this fighter data here, and then I added stringify so that it's not in JSON output, but rather a string so that the LLM can understand the output. And what I wrote here is that this section contains detailed performance statistics from previous fights from 2020 to the present for each fighter. And we want the agent to consider factors like win-loss records, significant strikes, submission attempts, reach, and other relevant stats. And then finally, a sentiment analysis, which once again, I dragged over the sentiment analysis data and then just stringified it so that the LLM can understand. This is what the model sees. So they see what we had in the previous workflow, which is what the OpenAI node did for us. They analyzed all the news articles and provided this analysis for us. And then I wrote that this section provides a sentiment analysis summary from news articles related to the upcoming fight. And then finally, based on the above information, we want the agent to recommend which fighter appears to have the advantage. And then we want them to advise whether the current betting odds are favorable enough to justify placing a bet on the recommended fighter. We want the agent, obviously, to explain reasoning, take into account statistical performance, odds discrepancies, and overall sentiment. And then we want them to provide a final recommendation and a brief explanation for the decision. And then importantly, for the output format, we want to return the final result as plain text with consistent styling for Telegram. Next, what we'll want to do is add a chat model. I generally like Google Gemini for tasks like these since it has a pretty big context window and it's free. So I would just select the Flash Thinking 2.0. So now testing our AI agent, we can see that in the output, based on the data provided between Marvin Vittori and Roman Dolice, here's an analysis. And then here we can see the output from our AI agent. So they're saying that Vittori is favored among all major bookmakers. The average odds are around 1.64. We can even see what bookmaker offers the lowest odds. So in this case, it's FanDuel. Then we have an analysis on the fighter data between Vittori and Dolice. And we can see that Vittori shows a slightly better striking accuracy and takedown ability compared to Dolice. And then for our last data point, we have our sentiment analysis, which once again gives Vittori a slight edge. And then just like the analysis in the beginning of the video, we have Vittori to win, obviously, but the odds aren't the best. So they're saying here that the odds are moderately favorable if you believe Vittori is likely to win, but they aren't exceptionally high value. And then the agent clarifies that the potential return is not significantly greater than the perceived risk. So their final recommendation here is a cautious bet on Marvin Vittori to win might be justified. But because these are moderately favorable odds, they're considering this a lower value betting opportunity. And then now that we have our output, what we can do is input this into Telegram. So for our final step inside this workflow, we'll select Telegram here. We'll do send a text message. And then this is super simple. All we want to do is first reference the very first chat ID from our Telegram trigger. So we'll select our chat ID, bring this in here. And then rather than item, we want this to be the first. And we can see that the result is 759-686-4690. And then for the text to send to Telegram, we can scroll all the way up and just select the output that the AI agent gave us. And then if we test this step, we can see that it provides our output to Telegram. And then here's what the Telegram looks like based on data provided for the upcoming fight. Here's an analysis. We have section 1, odds data, section 2, fighter data, and then section 3, sentiment analysis. And there you have it. We have a working sports betting AI agent built completely within n8n. Now, like I mentioned earlier, if you are interested, we have a temporary free community all around building AI agents for businesses. So in there, I'll be dropping this template for this sports betting AI agent, and I'll be going over real working AI agents to use in any industry or business. And if you found this video helpful, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more AI building content.